Welcome to This Club Sucks, grief support for parents after the lasagnas are long gone. I am your host, Melissa Monroe, here with my co-host, Alexandria Seamock. Each week we record our child loss chat on Twitter Spaces, where we explore topics around grief and trauma. Whether you are a bereaved parent, want to support bereaved parents, or exploring other sources of grief, we'll be here holding space after the lasagnas are long gone.
Oh, this club sucks.
All right, it's a little after 11, so we're going to get started. Welcome to Child Loss Chat today. Our guest is the wonderful Shari Wolf from Natural Grace Funerals. We used Natural Grace Funerals and Shari's wonderful services after Alice died. And it really made a big difference in our ability to grieve in a meaningful way. And I just wanted other people to know about these natural burial options that exist. Shari, do you want to introduce yourself to everyone?
Thank you for your patience, and thank you for having me, and thank you mostly for covering this subject. I love to talk about it, but I also think it's important that we all talk about it and think about it. So I'm pleased to be here.
We're so honored to have you, Shari. Thank you so much for being here. So there's a Business Insider article that Dr. A is going to post up in the nest and in the chat function that goes through some of the environmental impact of traditional burials. First of all, there's the formaldehyde and phenol, which are toxic and can even be fatal. And when we bury people that are embalmed, it can put up to, I think it was 800,000 gallons of formaldehyde a year into the soil. There's also the wood impact. According to Berkeley Planning Journal, conventional burials in the U.S. every year use 300 million board feet of hardwoods, 2,700 tons of copper and bronze, 104,000 tons of steel, and 1,600,000 tons of reinforced concrete. The amount of casket wood alone is equivalent to about 4 million acres of forest and could build 4.5 million homes. There's also the land space issue and maintaining the lawns, which require a lot of water and fertilizer, which affect bees, and the bees affect our agriculture, of course. There's also a cost function. The average traditional funeral runs around $10,000, whereas a natural funeral runs more between a few $100s to $3,000. Cremation is an option, but that also puts some toxic stuff into the air. And while it's a little better than a burial, still has some issues. But there are many eco-friendly alternatives that are also cost-effective. And I'm hoping that Shari will talk to us for a minute about her story, how she became passionate about this issue and how she became involved in natural funeral planning. And yeah, that's, can you just tell us a little bit about your story, Shari, and what drew you to this work?
Sure. Happy to do that. Actually, that was a very good intro to this because I came across this concept of natural or green burial. I guess it's been about 14 years ago, and I come from a completely different background and career. And at the time, I was working in the field that had to do with, actually at this time it had to do with seniors and things. And so there was two women that were doing a talk on green burials and home funerals up in the Bay Area. And I had never heard of either of those things. And so I actually did not end up going to their talk because, of course, I was in Southern California. But I went to the website and I read about it, and then I just started researching sort of their resources, and I found this nonprofit called the Green Burial Council, and I read about that. And honestly, within probably about an hour, I was so taken by the concept and how much sense it made to me And actually, those statistics that you just referred to were ones that a woman that was involved in the Green Burial Council at the time was compiling. And it just resonated with me with all the things going on. Again, even 14 years ago, as we were starting to think about the impact that the human being is having on the planet, that this is one area that never came up. And it's something that 100% of us have to make a decision on. And so it literally just drew me in. I quit the work that I was doing. I started volunteering for that nonprofit that was based out of New Mexico, and they needed a tremendous amount of help. So I probably spent, I think, about a total of about 3 years with them, immersing myself into not only what was going on in the United States, but also what changes were starting to go on with natural burial grounds, even just generally the consciousness of other options that were out there that were legal that people did not know about. So that's literally how it happened. I looked into, starting to understand home funerals, which we'll also talk about. They kind of weave in to this natural burial movement also. And in doing that, I realized the only way you can really make a change is you kind of have to jump in to the industry. You have to do it from the inside. So that's when I decided to, knowing nothing about the industry generally at that time, I mean, no more than any other general consumer, I just immersed myself and got licensed and started a funeral home back in late 2009 is when we opened up. And ever since then, I've been just dedicated and very passionate towards this mindset and this direction. Natural Grace, which is the company that I have, has continued to grow. I would love to say, I wish it was actually all natural burials, but the good news is that that area of death care has continued to grow and become more aware. And even like with this conversation we're having today, people are somewhat interested in it. And that's positive, and that kind of keeps me motivated and moving forward with it.
That's amazing, Sherry, and I'm so glad that you found it because you are really amazing at what you do. I have my mom in here who I know was really amazed by your work. And with Alice, we had a home service. So Alice was not embalmed. She was preserved in a way that Sherry will explain after I'm done here. There was no chemicals, no embalming, and because she wasn't embalmed, we were able to have a wake for her at home. And I know that afterwards, my friend Maleva told me that she was really freaked out that we were not embalming Alice, and I've learned that many other people were also. Now, they were all smart enough not to say anything to me at the time because I was barely functioning as a human being, but they were all won over because Alice looked perfect. There was no sign of decay, really. She looked exactly like she looked before she died. And it made me personally realize that a lot of the smell and sight that we associate with death is the embalming process. And without that, Alice looked really pretty normal. And because she wasn't embalmed, we were able to have her at home. She was placed on our bed. I was able to lie down with her. I was able to pick her up. My older daughter was able to lie down with her. Grace was 4 at the time. And as I was telling Sherry, that we were able to have a home wake, I think made a gigantic difference in my surviving daughter's ability to see death as something that is sad, yes. But it was obviously her first experience with death, and she was able to experience it as something that was completely natural. We had a room where Alice was. People were able to come and go, shut the door if they needed to. There was food in the other room, people in the backyard. It was a good old-fashioned wake, and it made a big difference for me. And I think it made an enormous difference for my surviving child, who now she's 13, she's never really had any pathology stemming from this death because her experience of it was so natural. And then we had Alice cremated because at the time it was, shroud and bury without a casket, without embalming. And at the time there was only one cemetery in our area that allowed for that kind of burial, which in California to me is crazy. I was so happy to see on Shari's website that now there are many, 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 many other choices. And there's many other choices for the now that we have hydrolysis, you can become a tree. There's other options that Shari will talk about. But not only was the home wake really helpful for me and my daughter, and I believe the other people that were there, I just cannot say enough about the grace and compassion and patience that Shari demonstrated. You meet people that are good at their jobs, and I want everyone that works, I want my tax guy to be the best tax guy because I hate doing that. It makes me insane. I don't want to go to school for a year to figure out how to do that. I want to do what I know how to do and have other people that are good at what they do the other things. And you meet people that are good at what they do, and then you every once in a while meet someone who was born to do what they do. And I truly believe that Shari was born to do this. My brain was completely broken. If not for Shari and my friend Michael and my family and friends, I just don't know what I would have done. But Shari is amazing, and I'm so pleased that she's on here to discuss these options, because when shit hits the fan is typically when we start researching our options. And when shit hits the fan, your brain isn't firing on all of its cylinders. And then we tend to go with what's always existed before. So the best time to explore your options is before you need them. So I'm really grateful to all of you being here today and listening in later, because this is really important stuff. We have to know what we're going to do for ourselves, our loved ones. And if you don't know about these options and you were inclined to explore them, it's just really hard to do once stuff's already turned south. So again, thank you for being here, Shari. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about the home services and the type of services that you offer at Natural Grace.
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. So I think what I'll do, because I don't know the background of everyone listening, how much they know about some of the choices out there. So I'll probably talk about the two main things, which, the home funerals and the natural burial approach. And then if it's okay, I would like to open up to questions. Usually in a subject like this, people might have very specific ones. So I just want to make sure that, in the limited time that I'm able to address, what people would like to expand on, that sort of thing. And again, thank you for sharing your story and your experience with Alice's service. I vividly remember it, everything about it. And I too, I think that must have been who I spoke with. I definitely did speak. A couple of people had come up to me during that service, and I think they kind of figured out who I was and had questions, and did share a little bit about their hesitancy and just how beautiful and how it impacted them. And so I can't help but remember that part. Like, that part of it was just so beautiful. And I also remember early in conversations with you when we talked about it, and you just grabbed onto that concept. And I'm so pleased that it's been something that was somehow healing and gave some solace to, it sounds like, everybody that was involved. And I would have to say, like, kind of leading into home funerals, that's probably the most powerful part of that kind of service. Is it just completely lays out for a completely different kind of experience than you can have in a mortuary. or a church even, or a facility like that. And when I talk to people about home funerals, and that it again can be anything from someone deciding to just leave their family member at home for a few hours, to much longer, or sometimes we will come and retrieve the person that's picked up, whether it's from a facility or their home, and then bring them back to the home or some other home, whatever it is they choose, for service. So there's no really one way that it works. The only thing that typically is in common with all of them is that the family really makes it a service that is personalized to that person in that situation. And fortunately, actually, in the state of California, not every state, but in this state, we are also legally allowed to take care of our own. Not every state we are, but if someone decided that they completely wanted to take care of their own family member, they can. And again, not that they always do, but it's beautiful that in the state we have a lot of rights. And that is certainly one of them.
That's
It is.
amazing. I did not know that. How long has that been true?
Ever since I've been in the business. Yeah.
Wow.
And another thing, I think you and I had talked about sometime in the past, there isn't an organization called the National Home Funeral Alliance. And that has been formed in the last probably 6 or 7 years. And that is an association of those individuals around the country that specifically focus on home funerals and helping families with them. And it's important work. It's important work. Most of them do not, for example, have funeral licenses and want to do that part of the work, but they want specifically to be there for families and making them comfortable, having an ease and comfort, like you had talked about, of understanding the preservation of the body, because that's important. It's very important. And they understand all those aspects and know a lot of options that families have, but that might be a good resource for those that are specifically interested in the home funeral concept.
That's an amazing resource. Thank you so much for sharing it. And I know Mo is in here, who I know has considered being a death doula before. I wonder if you have worked with death doulas, or if that's some work that the home preservation issue is a place where death doulas can become involved. If you have any information about that. And then I know we have a question from Dr. A.
Yes, definitely the death doulas are very involved. I've worked with them quite a bit, and they do absolutely beautiful work. So yes, I'd like you to take questions. I'll go ahead and mute myself while you take some questions.
Okay, Dr. A.
Okay, let me preface this question with first saying that in my family, nobody talked about anything, death least of all. So what do you mean about they can take care of things at home?
Okay. First, that's a really good point about people not talking about death. That is so common, as we know. Even today, it's extremely common. And it's important, I think, for all of us. Obviously, there's some interest because we're here having this conversation today. But it really is important because it is going to happen, as we well know, to 100% of us. And I think it's possibly a generational thing. I do find that younger people are more open to talk about it. But anyway, it's a really good point to think about how to open up that dialogue with our family, even if it's in a light sense, or say, hey, I saw that now this, natural organic reduction is going to be legal in California. And what do you think of that? And it just starts a dialogue of what people think, what they want, what they're comfortable with, and what they're not comfortable with, especially as we deal with people that might be, looking at that in some point in the near future. So, but that is very common that happens. And I think specifically when it comes to like the home funeral, what that means is that in the state of California, we are not required to hire a funeral home. That's what I was referring to. We are legally allowed to take care of our own. And you'll find even that many people related to this business don't even know that. So, for example, someone were to pass away at a hospital, Or, great example, when a child has passed away at a hospital and the family wants their child to come to their home and they want to have their child at home for a vigil or a service or what have you, the actual hospital will still tell them they have to call a mortuary to pick up, which is not legally the truth. That might be their policy, but that is not, there's no state law that says that. We have the rights to take care of our own. So it's very challenging. So many times I've shown up at a hospital to pick up a child, to walk out the front door of the hospital and hand them to their parents. So it's very common that people don't know this knowledge, but it is a right that we have. And it's important. It's an important right.
It's a hugely important right. And I know that for me, it made an enormous difference knowing that you were involved. Once we met you and you said, I will be there the minute they release her from her autopsy, I was so relieved. I would have, you don't think your kid's going to die, first of all. You don't think that your child is going to be at the coroner's office. I would have gone myself to the coroner's, and that is no lie. If they would have let me go to the coroner's office, if I could have done that without ending up in an institution, I would have sat in the coroner's office the entire time. I did not want her there 1 second longer than necessary, and it made such a huge difference for me knowing that Shari was going to do that, and then nothing. Oops, I didn't know I was going to cry. Sorry. And then knowing that nothing else was going to happen to her body after that made such a huge difference for me. So thank you, Shari. And I also have to give the LA County coroner an enormous amount of credit here also. At the time, there was a woman named Denise who handled all cases involving children. We didn't have a choice. Alice had to go to the coroner's office because we still don't know why she died. But Denise handled all cases involving children. I believe it was Denise that left Shari's card, even though I don't think they were really supposed to do that. But I think she read us and figured that it was an option we would want to know about. But Denise, instead of putting Alice in a hearse or a van, she put Alice in a car seat, just like a live baby. And I will never forget it as long as I live. I don't know why that made such a big difference to me, but I was so relieved that I didn't have to see my kid go off in the back of a van. And so I also want to really shout out Denise from the LA County Coroner's Office for making it so humane, and Shari, what you did afterwards to just make it a sad but beautiful event that was deeply meaningful to our family. I'm going to ask Shari to discuss some of the natural methods that exist, and bamboo caskets and becoming a tree. There's a coral reef option. There's hydrolysis. There's numerous options that exist, and I wonder if you could touch on some of those for us, please, Shari.
Sure. So I'll go ahead and just do a quick walkthrough on the natural burial, just in case there's any questions on that at all. So it is just a quick summary. Natural burial is when our deceased body is left natural, as we've been talking about. So obviously the no embalming, no chemicals are used at all. And then the body is wrapped in sometimes a shroud, which is, of course, like a natural cotton, typically it's made out of, or could be casketed in like a natural pine. There's beautiful woven caskets that Mus has referred to. And if, of course, you want to look at some of those or see those, it's easy to find those out there. But it's a different look and a different approach, of course, to the preparation of the body. And then the burial itself is then directly into the ground without using what's typically called like a grave liner or a vault, which is like either a concrete box or that sort of thing. Or if you've gone to a conventional cemetery here in Southern California, you've probably seen one. It's the container that the casket goes into. And so there's no use of that. We would go direct to the soil and then basically, covered directly by that soil. And then, of course, it sets itself up for really natural decomposition, which is one aspect of green burial that resonates with people. But another part of it is also just truly being back with nature. So, as we referred to years ago when I got involved in this, there was just one out in Joshua Tree, which is still there, and if you've been out in that area, there's one conventional cemetery out there. They own a lot of land that goes out towards the Joshua Tree, the National Preserve, and they just had a natural section. And I know that people had come from the area and asked them about it and wanted that, so they decided to open up a small section. And I think I probably did one of the third or fourth burials ever. And then did the last one of that section, I think about 3 years ago. And so it's been growing, and they decide now they've expanded it. And it's really quite lovely if you love high desert. And as you would go out to an area like that, you wouldn't even know you were in a cemetery because all of the indigenous plants are there. The only way that the grave is marked would be by a natural stone or some other kind of natural marking. It could be a huge Joshua tree. It could be whatever it is. But as you go through there, you can't even tell that you're in a cemetery. So it's really quite beautiful for that. And then, of course, it's, full of wildlife. And so that's, in essence, that's what a natural burial is. Those are kind of like the components that make it that. But when it comes to the burial grounds, they can be as simple kind of as what I've just explained to you, which is, you've got a conventional cemetery that now opens up a section that allows for that kind of burial. And there's Woodlawn in Santa Monica has done that with a corner because people in Santa Monica have been asking. So the city there has approved that for that municipal cemetery. And Hillside, that's also there in Los Angeles, did the same thing for a section. That's a Jewish cemetery, and people had come to them saying they wanted that kind of traditional burial. So a couple of those, and we call them hybrid, but basically it means it's a hybrid from a conventional with a natural section. And then there's a category where you have the entire area is just natural. So there's no conventional cemetery involved. So that's very simple as it is called natural burial. Also will have the completely, no mowed grasses, no pesticides, no fertilizers. It would always be indigenous plants to that area. And then the third level, which is really quite beautiful, and we only have one in California so far that just opened last year, and it's up north of Sacramento, and that's called a conservation burial ground. And that's when it's obviously natural, but you've tied in a conservation partner like a land trust. And what that does then is the money that goes to purchase the burials, right, the plot there, goes on to purchase and preserve more land. So those typically are definitely way out in very rural areas. And then, of course, you have just a tremendous amount of wildlife. So very beautiful, and even somewhat ties into the concept of fertilizing the tree because, of course, in an area full of trees, we, of course, are picked up by those trees as we are buried under them. So that kind of covers all of the general, I guess, concept of natural burial grounds. And then the other processes that are out there now, alkaline hydrolysis has been talked about for a decade. It finally became legal here in California as of this last year. I don't know of any colleagues that have one of the machines, but it is, if you picture it, just a large machine that it's kind of like a large tank, about 7 or 8 feet long, probably, 4 feet in diameter. And it is a process of basically liquid and chemicals, and it breaks down the human body to just the bone material, and then it is processed down very small, very fine, like we do in cremation, and that's what the family receives. It has been marketed as green because, of course, there's no fossil fuels used. It's all electricity. So that's been kind of the green approach that's been communicated to the public. I've only had one of those. It was just this last year. A family that lost their young daughter wanted that process, and they found it online, but unfortunately the company that did that couldn't do any of the services, so we were able to do that for them, but they also didn't own the machine. So this young girl was shipped all the way up to the state of Washington to do that. So I think they kind of felt like after that, of course, they didn't really have the green aspect as much because you had the fossil fuels on the flight up there. But I don't know how that's going to grow. It'll be interesting to see in California how that takes. It's like so many new things that are happening in the funeral industry. We don't know how the consumer's going to grab onto it. So a lot of the traditional, funeral homes are not necessarily investing into those methods. The third one that, unless something's changed in the last week, has not yet been passed, I think it's up to Gavin Newsom right now, is called natural organic reduction. It'd be interesting if any of you have heard of this. I hear of it quite a bit because, of course, I follow this kind of thing, so I don't know how it's really made it to the general public. But it is the process of, I guess in kind of a casual term, it truly is composting of the human body. It was started by a woman named Katrina up in the state of Washington. I think she had started studying this years ago. She's doing her thesis and decided to take this aspect. It created some momentum. She got a lot of financing and funding. And no surprise, the state of Washington is pretty progressive when it comes to this sort of natural approach to things. And I think it's fabulous what she does. If you have any interest just in reading about it, her company is called Recompose, and they really do a beautiful job. They do a beautiful job. I have sent one family up there, and then I also, through Zoom, the family was very nice to link me onto that service so I could watch how it was done. And I find it pretty fascinating. I love just the concept of it, that people would, whether they want it for themselves or family members, or they think it's a crazy idea, it does get people to think. And I think it's so important for that. But of all things I think we talk about today, if you want to just take a second and look up Recompose, it's really kind of an interesting concept. And we'll see if that passes here in California.
That would be amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that, Shari. I wonder if anyone has any questions before Mr. JB has a question.
This is a very interesting subject, and it's one that I never really gave thought to, but my question is about cost. Where does this range as far as what it would cost, for instance, myself, to use this type of service as opposed to the traditional way to do this?
Well, I know it is enormously cheaper. I'm going to let Shari take it after this, but it's a perfect time for me to introduce this really amazing fact about Shari's business. Shari is associated with the 501c3 that desperately, unfortunately, needs refunding because there was an enormous amount of fetal death during COVID. But her 501c3 benefited my family, makes her services cost free to people who lose a young child, which is unbelievably, it's just unbelievable. We paid the crematorium, and I think it was $250, and that was it, because of Shari's 501c3, which is still active and desperately needs refunding if you're looking for a place to donate. And then I know from her website that it is significantly cheaper. I mean, I think her most expensive option is still 1/3 of the cost of a traditional funeral, but I'm going to let her talk more on the cost.
Okay. So thinking about the question, just so I answer it appropriately, I think what we're looking at comparing is probably a traditional burial to a green burial. But I can also address the cost of the two other process we talked about, the hydrolysis and the natural organic reduction or human composting. Green burial, the biggest changes in price for a green burial would probably be the burial, the plot itself. Although I'd have to say, when you go to a conventional cemetery in Los Angeles, it's just expensive because we are in Los Angeles. It's tremendously expensive compared to other states. So, for example, if you were to go to Woodlawn, their traditional plot and their green burial plot are the same. And you go to Hillside, it's actually a little more for their green burial plot because they dig them by hand versus their machinery. So it's more labor involved. However, when you look at probably across the United States, so California, we're just kind of unique in ourselves because of just the expense of land and all the expenses in running businesses here in California. But as a general rule, natural burial grounds are out of the urban area. Typically they're going to be more of a rural area in most states, and so the actual land itself is tremendously less. And then, as we've mentioned, there's no need for expensive caskets. There's no need for a lot of staff costs for the embalming process or all those things, and the family can do a lot of the things that they want themselves. So typically for that, I would say the savings is measurable. Is measurable. I can't give an actual number because, again, it really is case by case. When I work with families that call and say they definitely want a green burial for themselves, and we start to talk about places, there are two, for example, that we've talked about. One is Joshua Tree, that's really considered quite affordable. And there's a second one that's opened up in just North San Diego County, if you know where Fallbrook is. Most people know Fallbrook either from just driving by on the 15, or you know it from, it's very well known in the past for its avocados. I think it was the number one avocado producer in the United States for a very long time. And it's a beautiful just a little rural farm town. And a conventional cemetery, little Masonic cemetery, has been down there for years, and people in the area had asked for some natural approach, and they decided that they would open up a section. They cleared out all of the trees and plants that were not indigenous to the area. And then, as we've been doing burials there, and I think we probably do more than anyone down there, they are, of course, replanting that area through all of the burials. So every time they do a burial, they're putting natural plants, or the family can choose their own plants and that sort of thing. But that cemetery plot, just to give an example, Woodlawn, if you just wanted a single plot at Woodlawn right now, it's about hovering the range of about $20,000 for a single plot. And
Whoa.
Yeah. Hillside's 40.
What?
Yeah, they're pushing 33 to anywhere between the range of 33 to 40 in Hillside.
Oh my God. I thought I couldn't afford to live, but I guess I can't afford to die either. Holy cow.
Yeah, I know, but we don't think about it, right? There's no reason to know what the pricing would be. It's not something we, think about a shop for. But down there, for example, all said and done, it's about 5 as far as the actual plot itself. But yeah, California's very expensive. Yeah, not to get on that subject, but I can tell you of those that are actually a lot more, surprisingly. So that's kind of, just because it's simpler, that is of great benefit. I actually think the benefit is so much, of course, greater than even the cost savings. It just, to me, the cost savings is just a beautiful, additional benefit to it. But everything about it, it's hard to explain. There are, again, if there's any interest at all, there are at least a half a dozen excellent documentaries on green burial. And when you watch them, it's not the same as being at one, but it's pretty close to get the idea of just what makes them so special. And there's some that have, kind of followed a person that wanted this in their life, and all the way through to their service itself. So if you have any interest in that, just let Melissa know, and I'll send her an email with a few links. And I know, kind of a different thing to watch a documentary on, but I think you'd enjoy it. They're really well done.
Thank you for that. And I just wanted to add for Mr. JB that if you use a cremation service, so you're not doing a burial per se, the savings is even greater, because you're not purchasing the plot, which is going to be the most expensive part of the burial package per se. I know we have a question from Mo. Hi, Mo.
Hi, Melissa. How are you?
I'm hanging in there, and how are you?
Okay, I've been listening and love you. I love all you guys for doing this and talking. It's been very therapeutic and to some degree. You mentioned I have been studying and looking into being a death doula. It's a very awkward set of different parameters. And I had twofold question. One, you skipped over, or maybe I missed the part because I'm right next to a train system, so apologies. The legality. I used to work for the county morgue in Los Angeles, and we were basically forbidden to offer any kind of suggestions, be it regular or alternative for people who've lost someone. It was a very weird job, and that's another story. The other part of the question is a personal one. I don't necessarily have any connections to a place. I mean, I like Joshua Tree, don't get me wrong. But when I go visit a friend, I either go to their site, which is usually a cemetery and kind of grim. But when I go, I would just love to not have a marker anywhere. I would like to go and get not buried, I guess cremated and keep my ashes somewhere. But what are the availabilities? What are the options for that? If someone who just doesn't want to be buried, do they have to be, or can, in California at least, can you keep the ashes with a person or put them somewhere that isn't necessarily a cemetery? I hope that makes sense.
I will jump in here real quick before Sherry goes and tell you that Alice's ashes are right next to me right now. And Sherry had the beautiful forethought to know that perhaps our family would not want to earn. And she took the blanket that Alice dragged everywhere like Linus from the Peanuts. She took the blanket, and half of it was cremated with Alice, and half of it Sherry made into a pouch, which to this day contains Alice's ashes. So Alice's ashes are with me, and one day I will either be cremated myself, or probably hydrolysis will be more available by then, and I'll want Grace to do something with Alice and I together. But I know for sure that you can keep the ashes because I'm sitting here with Alice right now.
Yeah, so I'll chime in on that. That's a good question because you're right. We assume that people sort of know what everybody is doing or choosing, but I'd have to say it's incredibly rare that we are actually burying cremated remains anymore. I would say one probably out of every 20 or 25 families I work with does that. It's really changed. So maybe because we're in California and along the coast, I don't know, but I would probably say at least half the families we work with are doing scattering. I happen to include urns in our cremation just so people don't feel like they're, pressure to go buy something. I just want to remove that experience. But in the, I think 8 or 9 that I offer, 2 of them or 3 of them actually are for scattering. One would be ocean, because we are legally allowed to, all of us are legally allowed to scatter our family members' remains anywhere in the ocean. It has to be like off of, a certain amount of yards or what have you. But the ocean is legal to any of us. We can also scatter on land as long as we have the permission of that landowner. And in fact, I work with a woman pilot that just does a beautiful job of doing air scattering. And she does it either unwitnessed or witnessed. And she has that for, of course, not just the ocean, but also a lot of mountain ranges, actually all over California and other states. So it's pretty beautiful work that she does. But yeah, most people are not burying anymore. And again, I think that is a unique thing to the West Coast. Because one thing that I definitely learned in working for that nonprofit was, as I called funeral homes and cemeteries or talked to them around the country, our funeral practices are measurably different from the East Coast to the West Coast, and especially like the Southeast. You'll see a tremendous amount of burial there, and even if there is cremation, then to the cemetery. And one thing that I just happen to really love about California is that not only do we have a lot of choices, but people are exercising the choice that they want for their family member. So you've got lots of choices when it comes to what to do with remains. I think the idea of memorialization, people still like somewhat. but they're doing it differently. We now have urns that people will take either land or water, and then there's like an app for GPS so that they can come back and visit that same spot like you were referring to, knowing that that is the general area of where the remains went, or they went at the base of that particular tree that were going to get picked up by that tree. So people are just doing a lot of things that resonate with them and probably to the person that passed away.
That's so beautiful. I hope that answers your question, Mo. We have a question from Maleva, who is on her desktop, so she cannot speak. She wonders, Shari, what happens when we pick up the phone and call you if someone passes? I think she wants to know generally like someone that we love passes, we call you. What's the process after that?
Okay. So I'll try to make it a really short answer. But what I did not know before I got into this work, so I'm going to make that assumption that most people listening now also don't know. But one thing is I didn't know is that we legally in the state of California, the way the laws work here, if we are on hospice and we're at home, then of course hospice can call the funeral home you've chosen to come get your loved one anytime. They're sort of the person that legally says yes, the funeral home can come pick up. And of course, if we're at a hospital, same kind of thing, or a coroner's office, right? You're being overseen by a physician. If, for example, my mom's 91, she dies at home today, not on hospice, then there is a protocol that we do. We're supposed to call the police. They will call the affiliating coroner, whether it's Los Angeles or Orange County, and then they will clear. They'll get some information from a doctor and then clear. So there are definitely laws that cover that part of it. So setting that aside, if there's more questions on that, that's kind of easy because sometimes we need to know, right? Like what happens if someone unexpectedly dies, right? Who's involved in that? But otherwise, generally, yes, the funeral business, of course, is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So any funeral provider that's out there will be, 24 hours a day, and we'll have someone at your home or facility within 60 or 90 minutes at any time. So I'm not sure if that does answer it, but hopefully between those two things, that covers that for you.
Yes, thank you so much, Shari. And I know you have to run, so I won't keep you if you have to go. But I will stay on for another couple of minutes and wrap it up. But before that, I just really want to thank you for sharing your knowledge and your passion about these issues and helping to educate people about some options they might not know about. As we discussed yesterday, most of the people that came to our home were unaware that it was even a possibility to have a natural service like we did for Alice. And we can't make choices when the shit hits the fan if we don't even know that there's options. So I really appreciate you taking this time to help us inform people of their rights and all of the options that they have, because I know that I have many environmentally conscious friends. I know I have many friends that would maybe not want to have their relatives pay 50 grand for a funeral, or who might just find it more meaningful to have them buried in Joshua Tree or under a tree or become a tree, or become there's a company that can help your remains become a coral reef, which is so friggin' cool since we need more coral reefs. But if you don't know about them when you're panicked and sad, you won't know to make those choices. So I just really appreciate you coming on today, Shari, and sharing your knowledge and your passion. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And as you know, I love talking about this. So I appreciate that you've got some people here that are interested in thinking about it. So thank you.
And I'll stay on here for another couple minutes. If other people have any kinds of questions that I can answer or anything that they want to share, go ahead and raise your hand. Dr. A.
I have a question for Mo if he has time to stay on for a second. What's a doula?
A death doula is someone who assists somebody who is passing. There are different forms of, believe it or not, there's even legal certificates to get this sort of thing. But similar to a birth doula, you're actually aiding someone in passing. You're not I am a minister, and like I said, I worked in the morgue, but it's not any of those components, so to speak, except possibly if the person cares for the spiritual side. But you're getting the people around them and the person who's passing more involved in the idea of death. And since we are such a death illiterate society, I think it's a very important role. So it's just a process in different states. Some don't even recognize it. Most of them have some sort of certificate now. And it's something I'm looking into, but it is still a fairly new process. So if that answers, I hope it does.
It does. Thank you. How do people reach a doula, or how do they even find out if there's one available?
Again, if I may answer, state by state. In fact, I just looked up on Google. I just looked up Death Doula San Francisco, which is where I am, and there's a school, there's a program, there are different certificates you can go for. Some are more legitimate, some are fly-by-night operations you probably want to avoid. So a little research will get you probably in pretty well. So just do a little research.
I'm sure you've heard of a birth doula. So this is kind of the opposite. A doula, as he said, is just assisting in that process. And, it's frankly probably not anything that people didn't do for centuries before we became grief illiterate. It's mainly just doing the work that we should all know how to do and that we should all be doing for our families. But the last couple of centuries since the Industrial Revolution, we've become more and more and more separated from death, more and more illiterate about death and grieving, and to the point where we need someone to help us do the only thing that's going to happen for sure to us once we're born. But it's a beautiful job that I wish didn't have to exist. But since it does have to exist, I'm glad that it's starting to become a thing. If someone's dying, deteriorating slowly, I'm sure we all know that this can be an incredible burden on a family who's, the healthier members are generally trying to work, take care of someone that's dying. They might have small kids. They might, have big bills. They might need to even work more because of the financial obligations. And it can be really taxing and prevent them from even having time to cope with the idea that their loved one is dying. And I think that a death doula can really be helpful in that, to help the person dying come to terms with it, to help their loved ones come to term with it, and make it what it is, which is a transition that's going to happen to us all, and to help the people do that with as much grace and acceptance as possible. Mo?
Yeah, just a quick note. You were accurate, and it's quite contemporary or side by side with the loss of midwives and birth doulas. The industrialization of birth and death kind of knocked out this, often something that like a local minister or a priest would do. But in this day, you don't have to be religiously minded. It's fine if you are, but yes, they were knocked out in the last couple of centuries in order to involve the funereal business or, hospitalizations of women who were pregnant when unnecessary. So it's a great correlation to make. Thank you, Melissa.
My pleasure, Mo. There's many resources in the chat. There's some information about the process of becoming a tree. They basically put your body in a pod. You can pick what kind of tree you want to be, and your body's placed in a pod, and then as your body decomposes, it feeds the tree, which is amazing. You can also have your ashes potted with certain kinds of trees or plants, and that you can become a tree that way. There are ways that your remains can be turned into a coral reef to help restore some of the dying coral reef. There's hydrolysis, which we talked about earlier. There's many, many different options these days. And I also we were talking about death doulas, and Stephen Jenkinson is not a death doula per se, but he is an amazing man. I think he has a master's in divinity from Harvard and another degree from somewhere else. lives a very natural life, but he is a huge advocate for natural dying and the taking some of the machines out of the final stages of death. This is not to say that he's telling people not to do chemo, or that's not what it's about at all. But when it comes clear that someone doesn't have much time, and I think a lot of his early work was with children, which, it really takes a special person. His whole thing is death with dignity. And he's just a remarkable man. And I know that no one thinks that they want to watch a documentary about death and dying, but he has many documentaries, but his documentary Grief Walker is one of the most beautiful documentaries I've ever seen in my entire life, and really something to consider. I highly, highly, highly recommend the documentary Grief Walker by Stephen Jenkinson Moe. I know that you would love it. Mr. JB, the same. Anyone in here, anyone that's interested in this topic, I think would be profoundly moved by the documentary Grief Walker. If there's no further questions, we're going to wrap it up. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today on this really important conversation. I appreciate you all, and I hope you have a beautiful day. Thank you for joining us today. For more information on the show or my other work, you can check out thisclubsucks.com or melissamarimonroe.com, or you can find me on Twitter at @MMeaning. May you experience some gentleness on your path today.